Okay, welcome to today's Zoom meeting, and we are blessed and honored to be hosting world-renowned astrologer and visionary of the soul, Erin Sullivan. Erin is the author of 6 astrological books, including Saturn and Transit planets and Astrology of Family Dynamics, to name a few. Today, Erin is going to talk about the outer planets as agents of consciousness. And as a quote, interpreting the agency of the outer planets with Pluto in sharp focus, Erin will talk about what now, in the times we are in and what we are facing, how we might personally and in that way collectively work through what may prove to be the most significant time in human history. Erin, we're very happy to have you here. Welcome, and you can share your screen by hitting that green button at any time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Great. Now, okay, I don't know where the thing is again for seeing if anybody's asking questions.
Scroll down, use your cursor to scroll to the bottom of the screen, and the panel will pop up in that green box that says share.
Okay. Video.
And now keep going. It should say audio, video, then share, and share will be green.
Okay, video, audio, video. I'm sorry.
At the very least, you could always put it on, couldn't you? Put it up.
I've just ended the show to see if I've got, no, it's just that it's lying under, okay, got it. Yeah, it was hiding. Just a minute now, just a minute. You'll see my screen. Right?
No, I think you might be looking at the document. But
no,
it's okay.
I'm not looking at a document, love. Okay, end show. Okay, I'm clicking on the green share screen.
Okay, it might take a minute. I don't know.
And then,
I don't please.
Oh gosh, and then you should have.
Can you put it up?
A list should.
I think you should move forward.
Sorry. I've clicked share screen, share screen, share screen.
Okay, Erin. So from here,
and it shows my desktop up on the upper right-hand corner. I mean, this is a really complicated system. Okay, so can you now see my screen?
Not yet. You'll need to click.
I did.
Okay, once you click on share screen, then you choose the document. You choose the slides that you wish to show.
I'm on PowerPoint.
Yes.
So I don't have documents.
Well, the name of your document, which is your slides for this presentation, should appear somewhere.
Oh, really? Or desktop 1?
Okay, you'll have desktop 1, then you'll have keep reading along. What are the others?
The others are whiteboard, phone, iPad, Finder, Evolutionary Astrology, and Microsoft PowerPoint. That's me.
That's it, Microsoft PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
But do we want to come in again? It's okay. We can come in again. We can come in again now that we know what to do it.
It doesn't have to be perfect. It's perfect the way it is.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's just go for it, okay? Because I'm going to go back.
Okay. All right, then. Let's just go.
I mean, I'm sure that I'm not the only person who is willing to share anxiety over stuff that isn't quite working. All right. So there's my whole screen.
Beautiful. We can see it.
Does that work?
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay. And, I mean, if you want to introduce me now, you can. I thought you already had. But, okay. So we've only got 40 minutes, sorry. And, right. So, options in consciousness, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And we're going to include the USA chart because it happens to be bristling with activity. And right now, I'm just going to show you one of my favorite little pictures I plucked off the internet, and it's a world, the whole world, as we imagine it, without boundaries, without bombs going off. I mean, there's so many images of the world now. We can actually see people walking around on their own property. It's quite fascinating. But the point of the talk today, and it's a foreshortened one because it has been as long as a 2-hour seminar, but I think that we can I'll skip through a few of my slides, but indeed, the very minute that Uranus was sighted, everything changed, because until that happened, we had a very many millennial old system dating back into the Chaldeans, and even before, if nobody noticed it, but we had planets that were visible between our Earth out to the boundary of Saturn. The minute that Uranus was sighted, everything changed, and that's why I like to call that the day the world changed. And I've just put in here a pretty basic little diagram, but still, visuals are always more impactful to the psyche than words are. And what we ended up with is when Uranus was sighted, it usurped the planet Saturn. And then when Neptune was sighted, it usurped Jupiter's position of the 12th house ruler. And when Pluto was finally sighted in 1930, it usurped, after a great struggle, the planet Mars's position as ruler of Scorpio. And so we noticed that it was such a tidy little picture. We had Saturn, Saturn, Jupiter, Jupiter, Mars, Mars, Venus, Venus, Mercury, Mercury, Sun, Moon and Sun, Mom and Dad, and the kids. And all of a sudden we get something really going on. And it's every century from the sighting of Uranus, a new planet was sighted. We'll get into the funniness of oddities of Neptune in a bit. I'm going to just put this one up very briefly because I actually have it in another slide where we'll see more dynamic. But I just wanted to point out that each sighting awakened a sleeping archetype in the collective unconscious. And global transits will activate the collective mood and events. And when transiting your chart, individual chart, each of these planets will invoke through stages new levels of consciousness, of awareness, and they will last for a lifetime. These are not, like a 5-minute, transit of Mars and you cut your finger. It's not a mood. It's a life-changing event. People say, right, Uranus is transiting my sun, and when's it going to be over? That's a very typical question, isn't it? Well, it's over, but it's never really over, because you will spend the rest of your life individuating, becoming increasingly more of who you are through the agencies of each of these planets as they come to consciousness in your own chart. Options in consciousness. Now, I'm just going to sort of paraphrase a lot of this. It's been said that the outer planets are transpersonal, which, after 45 plus years of really, really doing astrology, I mean, just practicing, playing, studying, reading, writing books. I mean, there's no better way to learn something than to have to actually, go through the agony and the ecstasy of verbalizing what it is that you're seeing and how to do that. And so we only know Uranus in full because it's had like about light here, Uranus. It's been around the sun, therefore, in our horoscopes, 4 times and 0.47 months, for 4 times. So we actually know Uranus transits. We can look back, but we can also look back like Tarnas did in his book, in Cosmos, Sun, Psyche, where you can look back even before they were sighted, and you'll see some interesting things about the United States chart. and we can actually see what he was coming, during these transits. But when we get to the other planets, like we've known Uranus for 340 years. We've known Neptune for 169 years. Only one full cycle, because it's about 155. And what it's very interesting about Neptune when we get into the United States horoscope, and generally speaking. And then in Pluto, in 1930, we saw Pluto. So we only have a half cycle of Pluto. We only know half of what Pluto does consciously in our mind as we see it go back through time. And I think that if we want to truly explore the intentions as the archetype of the planet, we don't necessarily want to look at it as something that is fixed and sentient, but more as an agent in its action. I'm putting this chart up by accident, so I'm going to go next and just talk a bit about very quickly about the power of outer planets. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. This diagram I whisked out of the planetary complexes by Dane Rudhyar. And I love it because there's nothing, as I said, more descriptive than a diagram. Every outer planet is almost like half the time retrograde. We know about the inner planets and their wonderful cycles. They're very quick, and they happen, Venus every 18 months it goes retrograde. We're going to have one coming up in the next year. And the transit of Mercury is, every 4 months we get Mercury retrograde. So we get kind of used to it, and then we get shocked when it comes. But when you're looking at these outer planets, look at Uranus is 41% of the time retrograde, Neptune 43% of the time, and Pluto 44 to 55, and it's growing because it's elongating in its orbit, as you will see. And so these planets will awaken in stages aspects of our own personal collective relationship, and also in tandem with what's going on in the outer world. Another very quick look, because I want to move into interpretation more. This is just a diagram that's in Retrograde Planets, my book, that describes the two ways that we get 3 passes of each outer planet. You can either have it go up, stop, go retrograde, go direct, go back over the planet degree, stop, go retrograde, and then station direct on the same exact degree. This one happened to be of 1 Capricorn, which happens to be where the moon, that was in the beginning of when I wrote the book. And then, or you can have it pass over once, station direct, pass over again, and then pass over again, not stationing on each of the degree, the single degree that we're concerned about. Like, say your moon is, 21 degrees of Aries. You'll find, for example, that Uranus at this point is going about to make its final passage as it stations direct at 21 degrees over your natal moon. So there are 3 phases of conscious experience, and the first one is the first hit, which is apparently not a great word to use, but it still is shock and awe. It's like, oh my God, the first pass of an outer planet is usually preceded by a kind of instinctive, there's something going on. I feel that I am about to undergo some massive change. I think in terms of it as a kind of rumbling deep in the psyche that leads up to a potent change. But it can begin a process that lives anywhere from excitement to panic to desire to make an immediate change, which you should never do. That's always my advice. Just hang in there. Wait for the second pass, which happens to be 1 gestation cycle later. The beauty of retrograde planets from Saturn outward is that they have 9-month periods of gestation. They will hit a degree, they move backwards, and then they move forwards, and they pass over that degree 8.5 months later. So it's very, very similar to a human gestation cycle. So there's an awareness of what's actually going on in your psyche and in your personal world around you. And the second passage over the single degree that it will is a time frame in which we have a lot of knowledge, but no real sense of understanding what's going on. And it's a kind of period of liminality, which literally means being in the threshold. The third and final pass of an outer planet over one of your natal planets in transit, the transit of the outer planet, it actually brings a kind of aha, I get it. I actually see what's really happening. I understand the process of what I have been going through and calling the astrologer about. And it actually has resulted in a complete and utter change in perception, which doesn't mean that you've changed shapes or you have to get a new wardrobe, but it does mean that you are now beginning a time in your life where your life has changed perceptibly, and on many levels. And consciousness does consider to continue to process this for a lifetime. As of now, Pluto is elongating and it's moving more slowly. And so we actually will end up with sometimes 5, 6, and as we increase along the ecliptic, as Pluto continues to elongate, longer and longer stations. And I have a sort of private joke where
no, no, you know what? It's like a lawsuit, Lady Captain. You definitely had to do that.
What? I'm sorry.
Somebody needs to mute because we can hear you talking.
It's okay. Then go ahead, Erin. It's okay. Somebody was unmuted and I've just muted them. I'll edit this part out. Okay. So.
Okay. Yeah. Don't worry. Things like that happen. Okay. I just don't want to run out of your actual absolute discrete time. Okay. That's why I'm rushing a bit. So, but. Okay, Pluto was in Scorpio for 12 years, right? Remember, well, when it entered Scorpio, we discovered AIDS, etc. And it was 12 years long. By the time it gets out against the backdrop of the zodiac, it will actually spend 32 years in Taurus. Now, I, for one, am really glad that I'm not going to be around then. Because I think that 10 years was darn long enough to go over all my Scorpio planets. I'm going to move ahead. Okay, now this is a quickie because it also will reappear. Notice that every single time one of the outer planets was sighted, the moon was in Scorpio. And it was also involved with the nodes. Moon in Scorpio, North Node, discovery of Pluto. Moon in discovery of Neptune, Moon Pluto, Moon North Node, and discovery of Uranus. I would say that's close enough. The South Node is in Scorpio, and the Moon is in Scorpio. And Scorpio was rising at the time, because they did have an exact time. So we have Pluto and Saturn also dominant in every discovery. This is leading towards something. See, we have Saturn and Mars, but Saturn is opposite to Uranus, but it's also involved by the relationship to Pluto in the third house at 6 Aquarius, which is squared by the node and the moon. Okay, so we've got a Saturn-Pluto link. It's not as strong as it gets as we get into, I'm going to have to move this. When we get into the discovery of Neptune, and this is a fabulous one because Neptune is rules things like gas and invisible, and you can't see it, and etc. It's almost as if it took Saturn and Neptune to come together in exactly the same degree and a few, well, half a degree apart, in order for it to harness, if you will, Neptune, so that Neptune would have a container. An example of this, I have several examples of various important events that take place in the discoveries, but one of them is that, they discovered that you could use lead cylinders, Saturn, to contain gas. Yeah, so they could use it as an anesthetic. So it was a healing mechanism. But we also have, that's really significant, and of course, the moon and the north node. Both of them are close together. It must take the kind of mystery or secrecy for something to go on, but we also see Pluto actually on the south node, okay? And the planet Saturn happens to be in sextile. That's not that common. If we look to the discovery of Pluto itself, and there was a major uproar about this one. In fact, they're always uproaring about it. The male scientists get into a room and they decide they don't like it. Well, too bad, because it is, of course, a hugely feminine planet, and this has always been a problem in the male-dominated society that has existed for millennia. So what have we got here? But we've got Saturn opposite Pluto and it's square to Uranus. But the Saturn opposite to Pluto is that they're actually conjunct their own nodal axes. And we'll go there really soon. And there we have the moon conjunct the south node. So in 2018 to 2010, Pluto and Saturn are actually going to be conjunct in longitude and on each other's nodal axes, which is a repeat of 1931 and 1932, and we'll go there in a bit. So just a little bit about Uranus. Uranus was the consort of Gaia. She had created some of her own offspring when she was born out of the ethers, or basically out of Eros. And self-created Uranus. She had him surround her with love and stars and the heavens, and he became her consort. And they actually inseminated and impregnated children. And these children were, well, they had 100 hands and 50 heads, and they were monstrous. And Uranus didn't like them. And he really didn't. And so, Gaia employed her eldest son, Kronos, to do something about it. Because after all, any woman who's ever had a baby or knows anyone who's had a baby, there's a point at which you just can't believe it's ever going to be over. You've just got to deliver. And she had reached this point, and every mother loves her children, regardless of what they look like, 100 hands or not. Uranus is, an elitist. He's the heavens. She hired, or, gave an adamant sickle to Saturn, Kronos, and he reached up one night as Uranus lay around Gaia, longing for love, as it says in Hesiod, and castrated him. And from that castration resulted some very significant gods. One of was the pantheon, was Aphrodite, and the other were the Furies. The blood of the semen of the castration fell to the earth, and the semen fell into the Cypriot Sea, and uprose Aphrodite in all of her astounding glory, because she is a motherless son. She is the daughter. She is the one who actually is her father's daughter right to the end, all through mythologies. The other thing about Uranus is interesting is that in its physicality, aside from mythology and the astrology, is that it's badly behaved. It doesn't organize itself the same way as, all the other planets do. It actually rotates retrograde and its poles are pointing away from the sun. So it's extremely eccentric, which is why it does fit the physicality of a planet, does fit the archetypal and emotional relational aspect of the astrological body that we use. We get to Neptune. Now, Neptune, the sighting of Neptune was really interesting because there were two sightings of Neptune by Galileo in the 1600s. And he thought it was a fixed star. I'm going to pass on. See, poor devil. He was, this guy, you've got to read a book. By the way, let me give you a book to read. It's called, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. The book is called Galileo's Daughter, and it's by Davis Sobel. She also wrote a book called Longitude, which is absolutely gripping, and everyone should read it. It's really an important book. It's a thin book, but Galileo's Daughter is a thick book, and it's the whole story of Galileo. His daughters, both of them, were in the Poor Clares, which is convent, which is the sisters of the Franciscan monks, the Franciscans. And so, she was very attached to her father. And so this is an incredible story about Galileo and what his whole entire, very detailed life was like. So I do wish you would read that one. When you read these things, you actually understand a bit more even about how astrology itself works. Now, this is what I put this here, where Neptune was seen, so now you see it, now you don't. Now, doesn't that sound like a Neptunian kind of image? Well, so once it was seen in December of 1612, twice it was January of 1613, and on the third time, it was in 1836. And I've just got this beautiful Sufic Ottoman, beautiful text that they use. They're Cyrillic, and it's about just being out there in the universe, being, turning and dancing and just being in a very, very cosmic kind of spiritual relationship with the self and the environment, not being that clearly defined. When we get into Pluto, we get into a place where we're looking at a love story. And I've always had quite a lot of sympathy for Pluto, Hades, because of he and his brothers, Poseidon and Zeus. After the Titanic War and the Olympians took charge, there was a kind of, these three fellas were standing around going, well, who's going to rule what? And so say, okay, well, let's draw straws. So they do, and so Poseidon draws the straw, the long straw, and it's the sea, and so Poseidon and Zeus draws the middle straw, which is to rule the heavens, the sky, not the heavens. And Pluto draws a short straw and gets the underworld. So that's where he gets his bad name. And we have more moons of Pluto now. But it was sighted on February the 18th, 1930 by Clyde Tombaugh, who was a very typical looking scientist. I rather like his little nerdy self and that massive telescope when you think of it. And so when we got, I'm going to go back to that. Notice that Pluto, and I mentioned it before, Pluto in Taurus, 33 years, in Scorpio for 12. So that means each of our generations, say from Pluto and Leo, which is my generation, there are still Pluto and Cancer people around, But notice how late the midlife square occurs, because that's a very important part of the midlife cycle. It's actually exactly, in a sense, parallel to the Uranus opposition, which also is anywhere from, say, 37 to 45. But Pluto's movement is actually really very drastic, in that people have to get through the midlife if you're born with, say, Cancer or Leo. Yeah, Leo, Virgo. There you've got a midlife going on there. Libra and Scorpio, 40 to 41, 36 to 37. And Uranus was in Gemini when my midlife occurred at the age of 37. So these outer planets, particularly Uranus, and Neptune is absolutely exact. It doesn't fluctuate. It's always exactly at the same age. Now I'm looking at Pluto and its orbit. Now that's to indicate to you one thing, and that is that as it extends out on its 17-degree orbital axis, it takes a longer time, apparently, to pass through a zodiacal sign. And and it's moved inside the orbit of Neptune regularly. And the last one we'll remember was 1999 when it left. And so it was there between 1979 and 1999, which was 20 years. It became a planet inside. And it wasn't until 1978 that Charon, who happens to be, of course, the boatman who ferries you across the river Styx, then what you end up with is an exceptionally eccentric but not non-solar system planetary pattern. So it actually does fit in. It's not at all, like an asteroid. It doesn't fly in and out. It is trapped inside the sun's family of planets. But it is a very important one because it deviates. This is the theme of Pluto conjoining its own nodes. Now, I have to move this. Notice that it takes it says here like 37 years to actually go through. I have to use 2 pairs of glasses. I didn't remember this. Yeah, it's 87 years that it spends moving around it before it intersects its own nodal axis, and 161 years for it to do that again. Now, the thing of it is that in the last century, and I mentioned this before, and I'll bring it up again going back, is that Pluto and Saturn have a kind of interesting relationship astrologically, but also mythically. And the nodal axes, seeing as the evolutionary astrology focus is very much involving nodes, I found this to be quite profound. And that's that the Saturn South Node in the last century was from 17 Cancer to 29 Cancer. It's still in that zone. And this Pluto South Node is 17 Capricorn to 21 Capricorn. So Saturn and Pluto are lining up with their own nodal axes between, well, about now, say 2019, it's moving into the Capricorn Cancer axis through 2020. And but the better part of this is that it's conjunct Saturn and its own nodal axis. So the Saturn Pluto will actually be on each other's nodal axes again. And as it was in 1930. Now, I was looking at some interesting aspects of those time frames because I want to go back and talk about how these planets will help you understand more about yourself in these three stages. But the nodal axis of Saturn and Pluto, both conjoining in Capricorn and Cancer, they take forever to shift. You can check them. But the South Node always seems to represent that which is most familiar to us. And the North Node, I mean, there's the kind of thing you can just fall into really easily, whether it's suffering or cake, But the North Node is something that we have to strive towards, that we reach towards, and we're looking really towards something that wants to be learned, needs to be absorbed into the psyche for individuation. And the ultimate challenge really is to try and balance both sides. I mean, an opposition is in fact a split conjunction. And so we're looking at the nodal axis. People always say, well, it's on the North Node, and I'm going, it's on the axis of the North and South Node. Conjunct the North Node. I really need to make that always very clear. The Capricorn-Cancer axis seems to represent a lot more about territorialism. When we look at the U.S. chart, you're going to see this. Territorialism, the love of home, family, tribal affinities, it's based in the feminine archetype of the Great Mother, the North Node in Cancer. And since evolution is a very slow and gradual process, the nodes move very slowly. We don't leap from one epoch into another. I mean, it's certainly a more feminine, balanced, and inquiring, nurturing archetype could actually mean a gentler and more feeling tone to all of life difficulties and decisions. Some may actually call this whole period of time that we're entering, and I think it seems, you read the news, you got your iPhone, you know what's going on, that there is a return of the feminine or the goddess, which follows millennia of patriarchal domination. And interestingly, Pluto was discovered in 1930, as you saw, just as it conjoined its own North Node in Cancer and was squared by Saturn. And it was in that time frame in 1931 and 32 where Pluto and Cancer opposed Saturn and Capricorn on both their nodal axes. And a lot of the political events in the early 30s shaped the future of the world that we know now, and particularly in the United States, but it is a global phenomenon. For example, Hitler gaining German citizenship and becoming chancellor of the country. This is not an accident. Whereas it's then polarized by Gandhi being in the midst of his revolution to free India and Pakistan from colonial rule and passive aggression, basically. In other words, how to get what you want by not fighting.
Erin, we have 1 minute left.
Okay. And then we ended up with, in the 1930s, we had J. Edgar Hoover, who was a closeted cross-dresser, transvestite. We had the House Un-American Activities followed on from that. Hoover's ascendant was, his Mercury was 5 degrees, ascendant was 3 degrees, and his Venus was 10 degrees, and Venus was 18 Capricorn. And so the transiting nodal axis were all on his planets, with Pluto coming up to transit that. And so the whole, all of the whole downline between that leads us into thinking, well, what's going to happen between 2019 and 2020, when Pluto and Saturn will conjunct each other around the 21st degree of Capricorn, exactly on their own shared south node.